Within the past couple of months, my home state of West Virginia passed Senate Bill 1, which is the West Virginia Invests Grant. And the media has portrayed this as a huge win for the state because it will now be providing free community college. And honestly, that's amazing. I was even thinking of possibly moving back at some point and taking some classes. But in looking into the grant, I found out that the way it's being portrayed by the state and by the media is not at all what it is. And I think for those who are going off to college, this would be something that you might not look into. In fact, you probably wouldn't. And so I want to lay out my concerns about the bill here because at the very least, it is not the free community college that everyone is reporting it to be. West Virginia has fewer than 20% of its population with a college degree of any kind. And it has the lowest educational attainment of any of the 48 contiguous states. Therefore, a bill like this should be extremely beneficial to the state because people who were not able to afford to attend college before can then go to a community college, get an education, and be trained for a career. However, my concern with this, the first concern that it was immediately apparent to me in the way that this legislation is written, is that this is a last stop grant. What that means is that this grant only kicks in if all other financial aid sources have been exhausted. One of the requirements of this grant is to fill out the FAFSA. So once the FAFSA is filled out, you will get your financial aid award package, any federal or state aid that you will receive. This grant requires that you accept all of that aid before this grant kicks in. On a surface level, that seems to make sense. But upon further, closer inspection, there's an aspect of this that, intentional or not, is fairly insidious. When you receive a financial aid package, it almost always includes federal student loans. So this now means that in order to qualify for this free community college, that you have to accept those federal student loans. Prior to this bill being in effect, many students might apply for college, get their financial aid package, see that it doesn't cover everything, and determine, I can't afford to go to college. And therefore, they just don't go. They're not taking out all those extra student loans because it wouldn't help them because they couldn't go. But now they have this additional grant that's like, okay, go out and take as much as you possibly can in loans, and if there's anything left over, we'll pay for that little amount. What I think the ultimate outcome of this is going to be is that the federal loan acceptance rate in West Virginia is going to skyrocket. And you can see in other videos on YouTube and plenty of articles if you Google them, how the providing federal student aid has also allowed colleges to jack up their rates because the students can always get aid from the government. And I think that that is going to be an issue. But my biggest issue with this is that the people that never would have taken out federal student loans before because they couldn't afford to go to college, even with those being in their financial aid package, are now going to be taking them out, and they're encouraged to do so because they think of this as the state has portrayed it as quote-unquote free community college. I'm from a different generation of college students. I'm 33 years old, I graduated high school in 2003, and at that time, we were very much encouraged to take out student loans, whether they be federal or private, because we were assured that we were going to be able to easily pay those off with the great jobs that we got after college. I think that 15 or so years down the road now, we all see that that's not the case at all, and most of us are struggling to pay back those loans. In a state that is so underprivileged as West Virginia, I believe that taking out student loans that are so hard to pay off and are so much of a burden on somebody, especially who's on a low income, will be absolutely disastrous to the state economy. In addition to this bill being a way to underhandedly increase the amount of student loan debt that is taken out by students, there are some other provisions within this bill that are concerning to me. The first is that the bill is written in such a way that it says that whatever program you are going into has to satisfy a workforce need as determined by the Department of Commerce. Now, what this means is that it's not free community college for whatever you want to do. You can't go to community college and just take general education classes in order to then transfer to a four-year institution, which in my experience has been the biggest reason that community college has been promoted to students. Michael Graney, who is the executive director of the development office at the Department of Commerce, actually said that the determination of which programs would be included was based on whether they would train you for a specific job. So again, while the media in the state portrays this as our community college is free now, not only do you have to take out the maximum number of student loans, but you have to go into certain programs. And to be more specific about what programs are excluded, we've already stated that you can't just go take general education classes, but you also can't register for any program that is not a vocational or very specific educational path. Like, for example, you could do an education degree if it leads to teacher certification, or you could do a nursing degree, but you could not take a music or art or theater class. You couldn't take English or history. You couldn't even do pre-law. It has to be something that specifically trains you for a job that the Department of Commerce finds is beneficial for the state, and you have to, at the end of that associate's degree program, be able to be certified and get that job. It can't be one where you have to then transfer to another school to finish up the degree. They further restricted the programs that you could join by saying that you also cannot take any courses for programs that are of quote-unquote lower participation. I would like to elaborate on that, but I honestly don't know what that means. And they also stated that just because it is an actual degree program, that you're not just randomly taking classes, even if it is a general program, unless it's on this very specific list of occupations that they want you to train for, this does not apply to you. And that was a paraphrase of a quote from Sarah Tucker, who's the chancellor of the community college system in West Virginia. As if all of that is not enough to say that this program is probably only going to be beneficial for a select few rather than just about everyone as they portray it, the actual requirements of this grant in order to qualify for it, because there is an application process and you're not guaranteed to get it, that the actual requirements narrow down even further who this is applicable to. The first step is that you have to fill out the FAFSA. You're probably doing that already, so no problem there. But keep in mind that filling out the FAFSA does lead to the financial aid offer, which will lead to those student loans. You cannot already have a degree, whether it be a certificate or bachelor's or associate's. If you have already paid your own way through college, and you, for whatever reason, I'm assuming that you don't have satisfactory employment or you need additional training, you cannot use this. I actually think that that is very unfair. I think that if somebody is already a degree earner and they're going back to college, there's a good and specific reason that they're doing that. And I don't think that they should be penalized because they already paid their own way and already put in the hard work. I think if anything, those people should be prioritized in order to get into the program. But this is not the first time that I have run into this type of requirement in West Virginia. I'm going to link up above if you guys want to see my video about why I did not attend West Virginia University. And I was excluded from a very specific program because they did not accept second degree applicants, which is the same thing as here. If you have any kind of degree, you cannot major in this. Another requirement is that you must be a legal U.S. resident and you must have lived in West Virginia for at least 1 year prior to the date of applying for the program. That makes sense, right? Being a state resident so that people aren't flooding into the state in order to get free college. But it also makes sense in terms of residency, because normally if you're establishing residency for in-state tuition, you have to stay somewhere for at least 1 year. The next requirement, though, I'm not sure I agree with, and that is not only do you have to be drug tested every single semester that you're in school, and the bill does not specify what drugs they're testing for or how exactly that process will work, or if you are excluded, for how long. Is it permanent or for one semester or what? But the drug test, and here's the part that I really don't approve of, must be paid for by the student. And I think that if a student is poor enough that they cannot afford community college, which has an extremely low tuition rate, because West Virginia community colleges have some of the lowest tuition rates in the country. If they can't afford that, and then they're needing a grant in order to pay for it, and in order to get that grant, you're making them pay for a drug test, that's probably an expense that they're not going to be able to make. And you're making them do that at least twice a year, maybe 3 times a year if they're doing summer semester. And here's the big one. If you take this grant at any time, even just for 1 semester, you are required to stay in the state of West Virginia for 2 years following finishing your program. Now, for some people who plan to stay, that might be just fine. But I think for a lot of people who are not going to be able to find work because West Virginia has the highest unemployment rate in the country, then that's 2 years that they can't work. And a lot of people have the option of moving out of state to get a job. And of course, that is something that happens a lot in West Virginia. If you look into Generation West Virginia, they have a slogan, 44 per day. 44 people leave West Virginia every single day. And most of the time, that's young people trying to get work. So if you take this money, you have to stay in the state for 2 years. And what if you can't get a job in those 2 years because you're in West Virginia? Well, keep in mind that also to get into this program, you took out a lot of federal student loan debt, and you only have a 6-month grace period after graduation. So what's going to happen if you don't pay for the 1.5 years following that because you can't leave West Virginia to get a job? You're going to default. And that leads me to my next point. You cannot get approved for this program if you have defaulted on a federal student loan. Now, I'm not sure of why this is a requirement, because in order to get a federal student loan, you would have had to go to college before. So if you complete a degree, that already disqualifies you. Maybe you just went to college and didn't finish, but if you're going to college now, you're taking the steps in order to better yourself, to increase your income. If you've defaulted on a loan, you did so because you had financial problems in the past. You didn't pay the loan because you couldn't pay it. So why set up this exclusionary roadblock to people who are in that scenario, who are trying to better themselves? It just doesn't make any sense to me. The only thing that I can think of is that maybe they're concerned that you wouldn't pay it back, but this isn't a loan, it's a grant, so there is no payback. So why do you have to not have defaulted in the past? The things, they just don't correlate. And one thing I forgot to mention about the 2-year requirement is that not only are you required to stay here for 2 years, but if you don't, then you actually have to pay back the help that you got. Now, it does say in full or in part, and I don't know how it's determined what portion you might have to pay. But there are 2 exceptions to that rule. Number 1, you can join the military and leave. And that seems to me to be an incentive for people to join the military, which West Virginia already has one of the highest military participation rates of any state. And the other option is to do continued schooling outside of West Virginia. But keep in mind, you just had to finish an associate's degree in order to then go do maybe a bachelor's or master's degree somewhere else out of the state. And that seems to me just to be a waste of time in classes, because a lot of those classes that you need for the associate's degree do not correlate to what you will need for the bachelor's degree at other schools. And if you were only to take the classes that are going to transfer over, you would take far fewer than you would to finish that associate's degree. So again, I think that's just kind of like a waste of time and money if that's the route that you're going to go. You also have to complete at least 2 hours of unpaid community service per semester that you're in this program. And by no means is working in the community or helping in the community bad, but I think that at a community college level, a lot of these people probably are working full time, they probably have kids, and while 2 hours is not a really big requirement, it could be difficult for somebody who, again, is working and has kids, which I think might be the typical person who is using this type of program. And they're also obviously low income if they're having difficulty paying for a community college. That brings in another thing, is that West Virginia is mostly rural, and a lot of people have issues with transportation, and most of the state does not have public transportation. I know when I was in high school, I lived in rural Ohio and did not have transportation, and there were also no organizations around me that I could even volunteer for. I had to end up calling so many places trying to volunteer, and I finally found one that was like 20 miles away. And I think I ended up doing all of my hours in one day, so that I, got credit for that for my class, because it was very difficult. And I think that that's a struggle that people may run into doing this as well. You also have to maintain a 2.0 grade point average, which generally I think is considered satisfactory academic performance. So that should be achievable for most people. One other requirement that might bring a little bit of difficulty is that you do have to take 6 credit hours per semester. And for somebody who I think is the mostly the type of student who would be doing this, which is probably maybe not a traditional student, and maybe somebody who has kids or a partner, or who is working full time, it might be difficult for them to take 6 credit hours, because that would essentially boil down to, in most cases, 2 classes. And I know that there were times where I was in college working full time, or working a full time job and a part time job, without having kids, and I had a difficult time taking 1 class per semester. I was in that situation a couple of times. I do think that does potentially pose an impediment. My point in making this video is not to drag on this legislation. I think for people who are in the particular set of circumstances and wanting to get these particular types of degrees, that this may be a slam dunk for them. They may be able to go to college, and maybe they weren't able to before, or maybe they were already going to go to college or are already in college and would have had to make up the additional costs on their own, and now they don't have to. And for those people, it's great. But I wanted to illustrate some of the concerns I have with things that the state is not really telling you, the media is definitely not putting out there. I wanted to let you know that this is not simply free community college. It's actually not for the majority of people. The majority of people would not even be eligible for this. But for very specific programs and people in specific scenarios, this might be great. I also, and really this is the main point of the video, is to just put that warning out there. By this being a last stop grant, they are going to make you take out every other possible form of financial aid before you can get this. So just be prepared that you're going to have to take out a pretty large amount over the 2 years or however long it takes you to get your degree. You're going to have to take out a lot of federal student loans, and those things are hard to pay back. And if you can avoid it, that is not a situation you want to be in. So take it from somebody who went to college 15 years ago, who has a ton of student loan debt. Don't get into a situation like this if you don't have to. just be aware when you get that financial aid package that if you can possibly get through this without taking the state funding and therefore not having to take out all those loans, if you can pay for it on your own, do it, because it will be so much better for you down the road. If anybody has actually applied for this program, I know the application process opened in April and the first people will be in the program this fall. If anybody actually applied, let me know what your financial aid package looked like. How much did you end up having to take out in federal student loans? And were you aware that you had to take out all of those loans first before you were eligible? And how much did this program end up actually paying for you guys? I really want to hear about that down in the comments. Let me know also where you're going to school. My hometown's Parkersburg. If anybody's from WVUP, hey, give me a shout out. I appreciate you guys watching. My channel is generally personal finance, but most of my personal finance problems come from my student loans, so I do talk about this a lot. If it's a topic that interests you, make sure you go ahead and subscribe.